views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
And hello, everyone, and welcome to the Social Justice Forums. I am Daren, Jaime, and of course, we thank you for joining us. If you're asking the questions, what exactly is the Social Justice Forum about? Well, we're a show that takes a look at the inequities that so many people face. We have an opportunity to have conversation where we promote civic engagement. We get multiple points of view and have some very dynamic guests. We encourage you to stay with us because the Social Justice Forums begins right now. Community Change is an organization that is building the power and capacity of low-income persons, especially people of color, to change the policies and institutions impacting their lives. Now, throughout the past 5 decades, Community Change has focused its work on strengthening the field of community organizing. Sharing with us now and giving us more information about her organization, we are pleased to have the Chief of Programs at Community Change, Afua Atta-Mensah. And Afua, glad to have you.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, thank you. And you're doing good work in the area of mobilizing. And when we talk about social justice, really a lot of that deals with galvanizing, mobilizing people towards change. And so talk to us about your impact in the form of community organizing and the work that you're doing.
Sure. So as you mentioned, Community Change for 50 years has placed its bet on deepening the ability of amazing grassroots community-based organizations across the country to be able to do their job of organizing better. So for example, we build and provide support to dynamic organizations in New York, like Community Voices Heard and Make the Road, helping them in some of their organizing efforts, helping with strategy for campaigns and policy and advocacy, both at the federal and state level, as well as helping to organize our own base on politically. So it's amazing work over the last 50 years, and clearly is a matter of urgency currently.
Yeah, when we talk about a matter of urgency currently, there are a lot of issues that are front and center that we're dealing with. I'll start with one right now, immigration, because we know that that's a hot button issue as we still are working to deal with those who are in this country and those seeking to enter into this country, but particularly those who are here. A lot of people still are facing problems, a lot of red tape, a lot of things to navigate through. And so I know for you, immigration services is a component that your organization has been tackling head on.
Yes, correct. For about 20 years now, Community Change has helped to form an amazing committee of organizational partners across the country that culminate into the powerful entity of FIRM, where we fight for just immigration reform at the national level and also provide assistance for local campaigns. Listen, sadly, a just immigration system in America has evaded us for decades. And so the fight continues. And we think it's extremely important that immigrant brothers and sisters across this country have dignity, equity, a clear path to citizenship, and an understanding that this is their home, right? And they have made and helped to cultivate great states and cities in New York, but also across the nation. So immigration equity is one of our pillar issues that we deal with at Community Change.
And a lot of New Yorkers are really struggling with this issue of affordable housing, finding affordable housing in a place such as New York where rents are skyrocketing. We know that development is going up, but then on the hearts and minds of so many people is, I just can't afford New York. How do you get into the game, if you will, to try to raise your voice and raise others? Because there's so many residents out there who really are needing some help, particularly with this eviction moratorium coming to an end as well.
Thank you for that question. I mean, our organization is premised on this deep belief, right, that people joining together are powerful and can change and shift dynamics. And in the area of housing, particularly in a place like New York, the importance of people taking collective action is can't be overstated. Whether it's, as you said, the eviction moratorium, housing has always been an issue of great import in New York, with a strong housing movement that's worked for more than 30 years. To have victories like in 2019 with the strengthening of the rent regulation laws. However, given the pandemic, right, it's exacerbated all of the things that we already know, that the issues of affordability, the scourge of hyper gentrifications across the state of New York, not just in New York City, have really kind of brought to a crescendo this crisis around being able to stay in communities, to be able to live in dignity. I raise the issue of dignity with immigration, but there's a great thorough line here to housing. And the fact that housing is really the crux of stability for individuals and families, right? If you're concerned about housing, even if you're working, you're nervous. If you are in school, or if you have children who are in school, if housing is unstable, it leads to difficulties in learning. So housing is really the crux of how people are able to even be able to take roots in communities. And the idea of being pushed out of communities because of issues of affordability is frankly traumatizing, right? And brings violence to not just individuals and families, but whole communities. So at Community Change, we are committed, right, to helping to lead on policy issues, because I think we have to step back and understand that a lot of these different systems of violence, which they are, right, the lack of a viable and equitable immigration system, the lack of equitable and affordable housing, are choices that are made. And so what we seek to do is build power to reverse those choices, right? There are clear housing policies that can ease, if not reverse, this trend of hyper gentrification, reverse these trends of a lack of affordability, where across New York City, as you name, people are building sky rises for the ultra rich and the 1%. And I would argue that the wealthy have never had a hard time looking for an apartment, but most working families across New York have, right? But there's a choice that this building is for a population of folks who don't have a need, as opposed to dealing with the everyday New Yorkers who desperately do. We seek to change that.
And you've seen some victory in this area, because through legislation and through advocacy and organizing. Share with us a little bit about how you get residents engaged in that process of getting residents engaged to really be able to raise their voice collectively to bring about the impact of the results that get changed.
Right. This process that you speak of organizing and leadership development, it takes a long time, right? To be able to reverse these trends of being isolated and being alone and feeling guilty for maybe not having money, feeling a sense of guilt and shame for being housing unstable. So one of the most important things that Community Change does is lend support to organizations on the ground when they're building these base building strategies and these campaigns. And there's nothing sexy about it, but it's essential. It's that going door to door, speaking to your neighbor, being vulnerable and sharing your story of possible housing insecurity or food insecurity, right? And letting people know that they are not alone, and encouraging them to take collective action, and hoping that they have, or guiding them to places such as Community Change and Make the Road and Community Voices Heard and Northwest Bronx, and so many other amazing organizations across the city and state who every day work to help people come together and take collective action. So I just start with the idea that it's a slow burn, right? This idea of taking collective action, when I think America, especially, there's this culture of individual, right? Like rugged individualism, as if that changes systems and structures. No, it's collective action. And to be able to push past some of the fear and stigma people have, and the deep shame, right? That you, as if you are the worst thing, or the worst thing that's happening to you, as opposed to an entire chapters of a life. So it's that type of bravery that we seek to find, right? Like an interest that folks want to do something different, and then trying to support this belief that is often, there's been centuries of degradation, particularly of Black and Brown communities, to tell us that we are supposed to live unequal in squalor. So really being able to fight against that narrative takes, frankly, long-term planning, humility, and a lot of hustle. And we seek to build upon that.
A lot of humility and a lot of hustle. When we talk about uh, residents, employment, housing, those are pretty big issues that you guys are dealing with. And when we talk about dealing with them, I mean really to the place of having a voice, getting people to get organized. And when you talk about community organizing, this is the way the social justice actually occurs. And this is the social justice show, right? Social justice has occurred through a lot of community organizing. Share with us the background to community organizing and the work that you do. Give us a little bit more in depth in terms of how you go about doing it on a day-to-day basis.
Sure. Well, it'd be helpful for me to just take a step back about how Community Change came into being, right? Like, we were founded in 1968. This is after the assassinations of Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy, to really come and to be intentional about waging a battle against poverty, right, across the nation. And this builds on these centuries of organizing, both in the United States and globally, of individuals taking collective action, right? And so part of what community change does is not just the individual organizing that we talked about earlier, about the going door to door, engaging people, having them talk to their neighbors, teaching those individuals how to have those conversations and build action plans and meetings and leadership development, but also to do the large scale strategy that has to happen, right? There's a connective tissue to these issues that we're talking about, of immigration, of housing, dare I say, a larger economic justice agenda, right? And a equity agenda. So part of what we also do is help to connect not just organizations, but individuals, and coming together with an agenda, with a strategy and a plan of how we have a coordinated efforts, right, to change policy, right, through legislation, but also to change narratives through storytelling, all right, through demystifying some of these issues that so many Americans are facing, but don't talk about. So that's part of, right, like a campaign strategy, and frankly, a long-term view of how to make structural change. And that's part of what community change lends as part of this larger movement.
And so, how do people get connected to the work that goes on, and how do people wrap around your services?
Oh, thank you for asking. So they can definitely come to Community Change's website online, where we have a host of activities that people can choose to engage in, either in our economic justice, racial justice, immigrant justice work. We also, of course, build power with our partners across the nation. So if we've once coming online and giving information, we can also help people connect with grassroots organizations in their very own neighborhoods where they can take action.
Yeah. Income support is huge, right? And I think that people are looking to get a better way of life, better cost of living. How do we go about raising the bar there, raising the awareness there? I know there are policies and initiatives that you have that are really centered on that. So share a little bit more about the policies and what you got going.
Sure. Well, first I have to use this example of income support to just give a host of credit to amazing base building organizations across the country, like Community Voices Heard and others, because this idea of universal income support years ago was thought of as crazy, right? Like, what are you doing? And now this is common conversation that poverty is in fact a policy choice, and there are counters to that. And so we
Mhm.
see that we've had huge success um, across the nation in the midst of this pandemic to be able to move forward the idea of the child tax credit, right? That is a form of income support where families received money, but many people, they said more than 60% of New Yorkers, right, received some type of benefit from either the child tax credit or the earned income tax credit. And through that, and it's not talked about enough, that initiative, which unfortunately sunset because of the bureaucracy in Washington, cut childhood poverty in half. Because what we know is that when working class, when low income people get money, they don't send it, to some offshore bank account in the Cayman Islands. No, they go out and they buy clothes, they buy food, right? They may actually put a little bit in savings. They may prepay their rent or their mortgage. So this idea of a basic income that at one point was thought of as being uh, bringing in a welfare state, right? And all the misogynoir that went around this narrative of welfare queens, as actually a policy initiative that allowed families across this country to better live in dignity, to buy food, to buy clothing for their kids, to save, right? To have that breath when you're not in that state of perpetual violence and trauma of not knowing when you're going to get another dollar. So this campaign that we are going to continue to wage and invite others to join us on this idea of a universal basic income that assures a quality standard of living for all people across this country is of a great importance. And if not now, when, right? We've seen in the midst of this pandemic that is going to be with us, sadly, for some time, that, what's happened with the economy locally and across the nation, the harm that this has done to businesses, we're going to need to think differently. And we believe deeply that this idea of a guaranteed income, of a basic income, is going to be critical to the war against poverty.
So for yourself, let's talk about you for a moment. You're very big on social justice and social advocacy. You spent a career really being an organizer and also being a voice. So for people who don't know Afua, tell us a little bit about her.
Oh, my calling and mission to this work is because I believe deeply that something else is possible. I come to this work with the belief of liberation for Black and Brown people in our lifetime. And the greatest thing that we can do is take collective action together. And so once I was able to come and understand organizing and seeing people who never believed that they mattered or had power, being able to do things from get a stop sign put in their street, all the way to being able to have determinative input into who the next president of the United States will be, has been transformative in my life. And so I am a New Yorker through and through. I'm blessed to live in the village of Harlem with my partner and two small kids. And so I feel blessed to be able to do this work and take care of my family with it.
Yeah. And as we look as a community, we recognize that our voices collective can really make a difference, right? And raising awareness. Are you, in the work that you're doing with boots on the ground, are you finding that more and more people are now taking that active approach of saying, listen, I want to be active, I want to make my voice heard. This can't go on anymore. We used to see apathy for a while, but it seems as though that there's this resurgence of activism and advocacy and really getting out there and saying, listen, enough is enough. We got to do better. We have to see better, and we're demanding results.
Yes, I think the crisis that is the COVID pandemic has created instability for people in ways that haven't previously been experienced, right? Like, if we're honest, everything got thrown for a little bit of a loop at best. And so it's forcing people to ask some really hard questions, right? I'd say there's a whole new conversation about childcare, which is a campaign that we're deeply involved in, because frankly, parents, but for the most part, women got thrown under the bus, right? When we're having to do two jobs in a more public way, right? On Zoom, people were watching kids coming in and going out and trying to do these things. So people have been shaken to their core. And I think are ready in a different way to try something different, to see something different, to say, it's got to be better what's going on now, so let's fight. And that is an opportunity that true organizers see, value, and move upon.
Yeah. What advice do you have for people who want to look at organizing or doing community organizing? We hear all across the city, you got the neighborhood watches, and you got tenant organizations. These are, grassroots organizations that are definitely difference makers. Everybody has to start on their own block. But for somebody that's been in it for a minute, talk to us about what are some of the things that maybe people can do to become better at the area of raising their voice individually as well as collectively.
Thank you for the question. Oh, my hopes and prayers for new organizers is that they take the craft seriously, right? There's art to it, but there is also science. And so devote yourself to the study of learning, of listening, of humbling yourself, of challenging yourself and others, of open accountability and agitation, and to get ready for a heck of a ride.
Yeah.
Don't give up.
Don't give up, right? I think that that's the thing, though, because when you have so much on the plate and you have so much that you're trying to accomplish, sometimes it is that uphill battle that you lose a lot of steam and you lose a lot of momentum on the way because you've been at it for a long time. But for yourself, who's been at it for a long time and seen the success, what's it like? Because there has to be a certain amount of stamina and a certain amount of patience that also comes with this because let's just be honest. A lot of people when they want results, we want them overnight. We don't always get them overnight, but
Right.
the fact is we have to hold out for a few minutes.
Mm-hmm. So one, it's okay to take breaks, right? As in everything, if this is a marathon, right? This is a long distance. These systems that we're fighting to take apart were not built overnight. The infrastructure that supports them, the narrative that makes people believe them didn't happen in a blink of an eye, and they won't be torn down in a blink of an eye. And so it depends what your North goal is, right? If this is about really changing things for yourself and your family, or if you're clear about your self-interest and what it means to you, you'll stay the course. Take breaks, do what you need. Organizing is not about martyrdom. It's about change and winning. And so you do what you need to do to be able to prep yourself for the long game.
And for people who want to get connected to your organization, please, again, let's talk about how they can get connected to Community Change.
So please join us on our website at communitychange.org. And once you go on the website, you'll find ways to connect, and we will be able to connect folks with organizations in their neighborhood, as well as ways that you can take action with community change. For those who are on social media, I will urge you to follow us on Twitter and on Instagram, where we post things about how you can take action, either by calling your members of Congress or writing letters or other petitions and actions that you can take either virtually or in person. So please follow us and look us up online, and we can engage and move from there.
Yeah, before we go, share with me a little bit about the pandemic and how has it actually affected the work of an organizer? Obviously, when you can't really do as much as we used to do, but how's it affected?
Well, at first, listen, it was difficult to take the idea, right, of movements in the street to online. But as conditions shift, so much the must, rather, the tactics. But so now we're doing what a lot of organizations are doing, hybrid, where we're still taking actions safely or safer in person, but also doing online activity, which allows people to enter where they feel comfortable, right? So people can enter how they feel comfortable, how they feel that they can make impact, because all of it is important.
Yeah. Well, we want to thank you so much for joining us and being with us here today. And I know that you got some great work ahead, and want to thank you for the work that's doing in terms of raising your voice and using your organization to really be out there on the platform for so many people, whether it's income, whether it's unemployment, whatever. You've been out there. We want to thank you so much for being with us here on social justice.
Thank you so much. Always have time for justice, always have time for BronxNet, and thank you so much for having me on today.
All righty, Afua Atta-Mensah, our guest here. Want to encourage you to stay with us. We do have more show. Watch us here on the Social Justice Forums. We'll be right back in a few. Welcome back to the show. Housing has been a challenge in New York, especially with the pandemic underscoring the importance of affordable housing. United for Housing is a coalition of more than 80 organizations that's producing a blueprint for housing investment for the new mayor, I should say, Eric Adams of New York City. The coalition's comprehensive set of recommendations is designed to shape housing policies for the next decade. Joining me now to share a little bit more is the Director of Policy and Communications at the New York Housing Conference, Brendan Cheney. Then we're also pleased to be joined by the Executive Director at MBD Community Housing Corporation, Derrick Lovett. And gentlemen, thank you both for joining us. And I'll start off first with you, Brendan, as we talk about a new mayoral administration. Really, housing is of the utmost importance for many New Yorkers. And I know, as I said in the intro, that you're trying to give a blueprint to the new mayor and which way to go.
Yes, so we, formed these recommendations starting back in September 2019, and then released them a year ago, and then worked with all of the candidates last year, sort of sharing our recommendations, our detailed recommendations. And then our main push, our main recommendation that we really wanted candidates to weigh in on was the need to double housing investment in the city. So we called for $4 billion of housing capital spending every year going forward, 2.5 billion for affordable housing development, and then 1.5 billion for public housing for NYCHA. And so at the time, all the leading candidates agreed to that, including Mayor Eric Adams. Unfortunately, he released his first budget and it did not have the increased housing resources. So we're gonna be pushing with the city council and pushing on his administration to honor that commitment and really expand housing resources.
Derrick, as you look at the housing crisis right here in New York City, how would you describe it and what do you see?
Well, I will not use the word catastrophic, but unfortunately, it's twofold. One, you have a lack of affordable housing, and then you also have affordable housing that are in deplorable conditions. So we have to take the deplorable conditions, correct those, as well as bring on additional affordable housing. And doing those on two fronts in tandem is key. One other thing I wanted to say, I know that we need to do a deeper dive to deeper affordability, but there are also people that are making a decent living that still can't afford to live here. I've heard the former borough president, Reverend Diaz Jr. once said that his son had to actually move out of the Bronx because either he was overqualified for affordable housing and couldn't afford the market rate. So we have to do a blended mix.
Yeah. When we look right now, we know the eviction moratorium is up in New York State. We're anticipating that there may be many people who still end up, well, I'd not say still, but will end up being on the homeless side of things. And we already have an emerging homeless population already. I know that you guys have talked about policies and trying to deal with the homeless and housing. Share with our viewers a little bit about how you see this and what you'd like to see happen in this area.
Sure. Derrick, if it's okay, I'll go first. We started our plan looking sort of long term at what we needed to do to address the crisis. And then in the meantime, we had the COVID pandemic, which created additional housing need. And so the federal government provided some resources to try and prevent evictions, to help people pay their rent when they couldn't afford it. It's not been enough. And so the city and the state are going to need to find other resources to help the families, the households that still owe back rent, even with the federal support. And so that, like state rental assistance, city programs that would help people stay housed as well. There's going to be a need to have a lot of resources to prevent people from being evicted.
Yeah.
I would say that's spot on. But another thing that we have to take a look at is jobs. We talk about affordable housing and how are they built? They're constructed, and we need the Black and brown people that live in these communities to also be a party to some of these jobs. HPD and NYCHA are very adamant about, if you're going to take loans or work on our properties, you must hire from the local community. We've been working with a group called Urban Strategies, run by LaShawn Henry, that's been doing a great job for us, assisting us with getting these workers, connecting them with the contractors, and ensuring that these folks are being placed.
Yeah. Well, we know that when we talk about New York City and we look at the things that go on, particularly in the area of housing, racism and classism are huge. And I know that you guys have also tried to work on a strategy to deal with racial equity and to deal with that when it comes to housing. Share with our viewers a little bit more about the vision that you see in terms of impacting along racial lines.
Yeah, when we came together as a coalition, there were some principles that we came up with to guide our work. And one of them was to address the, long-term racial disparities, the racial discrimination that long existed in housing. And so, we looked at things that would help address that. One of the things we're pushing for is an increase in home ownership in the city, affordable home ownership in the city, and doing that in a way that tries to reverse the long home ownership gap that exists by race in the city. And so trying to give that opportunity for wealth building to Black and Latinx New Yorkers that has long existed for white New Yorkers. And also looking at other forms of cooperative ownership and things like that. And, really expanding legal assistance to protect tenants and protect homeowners. So we're really looking for ways that we can be conscious of that long history. And then one other thing is really trying to push on all neighborhoods to be a part of the housing plan. And so I think for a long time, a lot of the affordable housing was built in neighborhoods that were predominantly Black New Yorkers and Latinx New Yorkers, and really pushing for neighborhoods that are predominantly white, neighborhoods that are wealthier, that have often avoided building affordable housing, and really pushing for them to be a part of the solution as well.
Yeah, Derrick, when we talk about affordable housing in New York, we say that there's not enough being built. They're saying that, we see buildings going up, and we see a lot of development going across the city from all 5 of the boroughs. But when we look around, we can see the people who really need it are sometimes finding themselves being priced out. And so how do we expand, and how do we get this affordable housing situation in a more better light?
Well, I think I do want to quickly address one thing about what was just said. In Black and brown communities, we are treated unjustly. And I think in other communities they're not. I think that in our communities, we must exercise the vote, not only vote when there's a presidency, but the local elections, to hold your local elected officials accountable for giving you the services that you need. Moving on to your question, this is a supply and demand issue. There's quite a bit of housing that needs to be built. It needs to be done to a deeper level of affordability. But now, when you go deeper to affordability, there's less income coming in. So you have to have some type of a mixed income in order to go deeper. And you go deeper one, and you have to go higher the other. At the end of the day, you still have to operate these buildings. Unfortunately, you can't operate them if you're not collecting the rents.
Yeah. So where do we go from here? I mean, I know you guys got boots on the ground. Where do we go from here, given the fact that we're in the first quarter of a new year, new mayoral administration? Where do we go from here?
I think one thing you have to do is look at your stock. What are you building? How can you build something that can afford to carry itself, be a bit more sustainable? For example, MBG with Trinity Financial and Monadnock as the general contractor, we're building the largest passive housing building in North America, 425 Grand Concourse. That will have a 50% reduction in utility costs. Having the reduction in utility costs will allow you to have lower rents. So we have to figure out how can we be sustainable and carrying the buildings, and also with the rents we charge, which allow us to then go to a deeper affordability.
And I think it's really, working, pressuring the new mayor, pressuring the relatively new governor to really deliver the resources so that groups like Derrick can do the work and can build the housing, can preserve the housing, showing that we really need to expand funding if we're going to address this crisis.
If I can say this, and I'm sorry,
Yeah, go ahead, Derek.
a lot of times, and this is one thing, a lot of groups with pandemic, they've been, talking, the residents on one side, the landlord on the other, and it's been an us against them. And one thing that we have to understand, it's not us against them. We're in this together. We're in this together. We need to find solutions together. We need to work together at all levels.
So when we talk about NYCHA, I know that's a huge issue. People are still talking about NYCHA all across the city, the work that needs to go on there. We could do a whole show, and neither of us have time to really be able to address the issues with NYCHA. But when we look and see what's happening right now, what are some of the immediate things that we can talk about on a platform that can be addressed with?
Well, let me talk about what we did. MBD teamed up with L&M and Canberra. We have 772 units of the Baychester Murphy projects. And when you go there and you look at them, you would think that you're in a high-end establishment. Treating folks with dignity will help rise them up. And I think that NYCHA had to go public-private in order to bring more income in and more capacity in order to give the services to the tenants that they need and deserve.
Yeah, we were really hoping for a lot of federal funding from the Build Back Better legislation for NYCHA, for public housing. We all know NYCHA has $40 billion in repair needs. It looked like there was a chance of getting something close to that from the Build Back Better legislation. I think we're more pessimistic about that right now. And so I think we will still push for that. But without that, what we need is a state and the city to step up. And so that's why we've called for the city to spend $1.5 billion per year for public housing, capital for public housing repairs, and calling on the state to match that. So that's $3 billion per year from the city and state. It doesn't get you to 40 billion, but it gets you along the way. And then you need these programs like Derrick's talking about. I think, you need the RAD, program or the blueprint or other ways to fill in that gap.
Yeah. What's been the response of elected officials and leaders? I know we talked about the mayor a little while ago, but when it comes to this issue of housing, what have you heard from elected leaders? How much of a priority? Everybody talks about it, and I can say talks about it, but how much of a priority do you deem it in the hearts and minds of those who are elected leaders?
So, at the state level, we saw a good housing, Governor Hochul put out a new 5-year housing plan. It's pretty good. I think, we're going to push for some more resources. We certainly want to see more resources for NYCHA in there. But I think it was a good commitment. And then on the city level, Mayor Adams has said housing's a priority. He agreed to our commitment to raise spending. But really, the where you see someone's priorities is in the budget. And in his first budget, it's not in there yet. And so, I believe that he understands it. And so, but we just want to see it in the budget.
Derrick, you talked a little bit about the work that you did with the NYCHA property and really giving people dignity and decency. And when we see the deterioration that's going on in NYCHA, it's been appalling sometimes. It's been disappointing. But if you had a forward vision as to how to deal, and I think you shared a little bit about that blueprint in which how can we better suit in areas like NYCHA where there is public housing, it's not going away, and we just want to be able to see it become sustainable and at the same time, as you say, also beautiful for those who actually live there.
I think we need to look at best practices. I don't think we need to look at recreating the wheel. I think we need to, as Brandon said, bring in additional funding, and let's go with what works. There's private-public RAD, which allows more funds to come in and do the rehab. status quo and putting a head in the sand is not going to do it. I think this is a new invention. I spoke to a lot of the folks that have come out and seen what was done. They like it. I think we should move forward. We just need more funding.
Let me talk about the issue of home ownership because that's huge. I think that for many people, the American dream is always to just own a home, and I think there's nothing wrong with that. But I think what's wrong is sometimes people just don't have the money to be able to actually own a home. And when you talk about New York, we've got some skyrocketing prices that I don't think that some people ever be able to tap into home ownership within their lifetime. But there are methods and ways that we can get more people into homes. So I want to get your take on home ownership in New York City and the work that you're doing to try to bring that about for people.
Our report was long and comprehensive. We looked at affordable housing from a lot of different angles, and one of the things we did focus on was home ownership. And the way to increase affordable home ownership is to both increase the supply of affordable home ownership, so making sure that that is something that HPD is building home ownership units, or finding other ways to sort of expand that supply so there's more supply for people to get into, and supply that is affordable, that is subsidized. And then also increasing the subsidies, the down payment assistance that helps people access that as well. And so if you're increasing the supply and you're increasing the subsidies and support for people to buy, you're increasing those opportunities. And then also looking at other models where people can buy or collectively buy, affordable co-ops, things like that can help tenants become owners.
Yeah.
I don't have much more to add to that. I think that's pretty much spot on. I think that, from like when the GIs were coming back from the war, a lot of the, that was all from government financing, and they found out a way to keep blacks out of it, right? If you were a domestic worker, then you couldn't get the loan, and most blacks were domestic workers. They found a way of redlining us. And I think that we've found that in many ways in our communities that we're always kept out of wealth building opportunities. I think homeownership is exactly that. It will take deep subsidies in order to build something. There's a cost to it. Who's going to offset the cost? It's usually subsidies. And that subsidy, whether it's evaporated over a 20, 25-year period where it used to be, or there's a limit on the what you can flip it for to keep it affordable, is yet to be seen. I know that HPD is working on their open door program, which is the for sale program. I think they sharpen their pencils on the developer side. I think they need to sharpen it again on what would mean for the end users, the home buyers, and see if there can be a win-win there.
Yeah. Going forward in 2022, obviously optimistic about the budget. We know that you said that at the top, Brenda, that some things were left out of the city budget, and now the quest is to talk to lawmakers to try to see about how we can increase, funding going towards housing going forward. What can we anticipate going throughout this 2022 year? Because, we're trying to come out of this pandemic as best as we possibly can, but yet and still a lot of, it's a lot of delays and a lot of things. Do you foresee some quick action on some things, or do you think that this is going to be a longer battle here?
It's hard to know for sure. Mayor Adams committed to this on the campaign trail. Now that he's got his housing team pretty much assembled, I think we are hopeful that the housing team will start to work on a new housing plans, that Adams can show us his vision, and that with that housing plan is a plan to increase resources. But we're not going to just wait for it. We're going to be really pushing and advocating to make sure that is the case. I think we're making the case that it is a good investment to increase spending even at this time, right? That like housing investment creates jobs. It's a stimulus in a way that the city doesn't have as many ways to create stimulus like this. And so it is a good investment in addition to being a thing that is desperately needed right now.
Yeah. And as we look towards the future, obviously we know that the housing crisis is going to be a major thing to talk about in New York City across. We talked about the Build Back Better program. I know we said we're a little bit more pessimistic about that, but can you just share from your perspective, if this doesn't go across the finish line, and we know where things stand right now, if it doesn't make it across the finish line, how much are New Yorkers really affected by this not going across the finish
there were so many good things in that legislation that would have really helped New Yorkers. We just have this long-standing housing crisis where people are housing unstable, people are becoming homeless, having trouble leaving homelessness, and there was funding for repairs at public housing. There was funding for a really big increase, not as much as we needed, but a really big increase in rental assistance that could have helped people be stable, have stable housing, to pay 30% of their income in rent, and to have extra money now to pay for other necessities. And there was more funding to build affordable housing. And so without that, what we have is more of the status quo, more of this longstanding housing crisis that hopefully the city and state can help deal with. There's another chance if Build Back Better doesn't pass. There's talk of adding some of those resources in the budget. I don't think would be as big as we're seeing in Build Back Better by any stretch, but any additional housing resources will help. But without it, it's status quo, which is, I think, intolerable.
Yeah. Derrick, I know you're doing a lot of work. For people who don't know about your company, please share with us about your company and the work that you do.
Absolutely. I work for MBD Community Housing Corp. The name was originally Mid-Bronx Desperados. They thought it was a gang and would not let them
Yes.
legally. So MBD Community Housing Corp, and from the 1974, and I stand on the shoulders of heroes and sheroes. And basically what we're doing is moving things forward. I think the most important thing, other than bringing in the quantity of housing, is making sure we bring in the quality of housing. By bringing in the quality of housing and raising the bar, gives people the ability to live, wake up in the morning and feel like they're part of a wonderful, beautiful community. I said one thing to my porters and supers. I said, you go to Park Avenue in Manhattan, you look at the floors, they shine, the metal glistens. I said, you have the same skill sets, you work the same time, you have the same tools. When we reposition these buildings, they should look like you can put them on Park Avenue, they should look like they belong there, and they do. 32BJ is the union for our maintenance staff. We have a great relationship with them. There's something called the Thomas Showman Fund, which is an amazing training. And all of my supers and porters take training. What we've done is you can't put millions of dollars into the brick and mortars and not invest in your human capitals. And some of the men and women can't afford to go at night because they have families. So what we did is we gave a half a day to the supers and a half day a week to the porters to send them to this training so that they can benefit from the wonderful training that 32BJ offers.
Amazing work that goes on. Amazing work that goes on there. Transformative too. When we look at the space and the thing that you're doing there, I see Brandon shaking his head. But talk to us a little bit about you guys working together and how you guys have worked in tandem.
Sure. So, what we wanted to do was bring together, more than 80 organizations and find out what we could agree on to address the housing crisis. And, the New York Housing Conference is a small shop. We've got 5 staff right now. We put out policy papers and things like that. We rely on groups like Derrick's to help us understand the situation on the ground. And then also we try our best to support them as they're doing the work. So like they're telling us how they think we should be influencing policy. And then we're hoping that our policy work is supporting their work.
And, Daren, I'm a recovering banker. Out of the Marine Corps, I started off as a bank teller, wound up as a vice president on Wall Street, underwriting construction loans. So sitting in this seat, having the knowledge of how the finances go and now how the development goes, it's able for me to bring a unique skill set to this community. And it's our issues in the Bronx and Queens and Brooklyn, it's not unique. It's very similar. And so having a group like, to work with Brandon helps us pull things together and kind of move issues forward.
Yeah. The policy, working together works, right? And I think there's so many organizations out there that really want to see better for not just their organization, but for the city. And to put together a collaborative effort, to have more than 80 organizations really be able to deal with some of these major issues that so many New Yorkers are actually facing. We can always talk about the housing crisis in New York because we've got affordable housing, we've got homelessness, we've got people just trying to seek the path to home ownership. These are all things that consistently New Yorkers have had to deal with, but at the same time, trying to find ways and organizations to help them to be able to overcome. And so before we go, just share about that, just being able to impact people through the work that you do, because the work that you do, Derrick, has helped people have a better way of life. right? It changes the quality of life. And so just share about, your feelings on the impact and your involvement.
I was sitting at a local eatery, and somebody grabbed me from behind and started kissing me all over my head. And it was one of my seniors. And she said, "I love you. I love you. I love you." And it brought a tear to my eye. When you can affect people that way, nothing else needs to be said.
All right,
Yeah.
Brandon.
And I think on our end, it's just, I think we're so high up from a policy standpoint that working with groups like Derrick to see the work they're doing on the ground is huge. I think there's times when it feels disappointing when something like Build Back Better almost passes and then doesn't. But knowing that maybe the big victory didn't happen yet, we've got a lot of small victories, and really, you put your head down, you do the work, and you hope to see some small changes, and you do see some small changes, and that feels pretty good.
So if people want more information about your organization before we go, tell them how they can get connected.
Sure. So you can find information about us on the web. We're the New York Housing Conference. So you can Google us or find us at our website, which is www.thenyhc.org. You can learn more about United for Housing at www.housing.thenyhc.org. And you can learn about us and reach out and find out ways you can be helpful, or find us on social media.
All right, Derrick, you get the last word.
Absolutely. You can find us at mbdhousing.org, www.m.MaryBerryDerrick, mbdhousing.org. And it's a pleasure to be here, and looking forward to continue this amazing work that we're doing together.
All right. Derrick, Brandon, great having you guys both on the show. I want to thank you so much for joining us and being here with us on the Social Justice Forums. Thank you much.
Thanks for having us.
All righty, everybody. Well, we want to let you know that we've come to the end of our show today. We have had great dialogue, great conversation, and we're inviting you to also find out more about the organizations that we've shown, the issues that are being talked about, and most of all, the opportunity for you to get involved. Now, we invite you. Join us next week. We're going to elevate the conversation, have better information coming your way, better discussion. We're trying to take it up every week, elevating the platform of information, awareness, just so that you can be better informed. We thank you for joining us on the Social Justice Forums. I'm Daren, Jaime. Until next time we meet, stay safe. We'll talk to you next week.